And welcome to Northern Kentucky History Hour. If you're joining us on Facebook, we say welcome, and we are going to pause just for a couple minutes as we let everyone in who's joining us via Zoom. But in the meantime, if you're just getting into the meeting, this is Northern Kentucky History Hour with Behringer-Crawford Museum. We are so glad that you're joining us on this rainy evening and really looking forward to a great conversation tonight. And again, just letting everyone in. Great to see so many familiar faces and names now. This is episode 45, friends. Can you believe that? And it's great to see you all tonight as we're letting everybody into Northern Kentucky History Hour. It'll be just another minute or so as we let everybody into the meeting who's joining us via Zoom. Friends on Facebook, be patient with us. We'll be ready in just a moment. Okay, this looks good. So good evening. Welcome to Northern Kentucky History Hour, episode 45. Can't believe it. My name is Tara Johnson-Nome, and I am your host for this evening's presentation. So glad to have you all tonight. This History Hour project is an initiative of Behringer-Crawford Museum, and we are so thankful to the staff of the museum and also the trustees. I'm actually a member of the Board of Trustees. This is just a hobby for me, and very, very grateful to the board and the staff for helping us produce this over the last year. I think it's been a great way to use our time during the pandemic to learn more about Northern Kentucky history. We're also very grateful to the supporters of the financial supporters of the museum. Behringer-Crawford Museum is supported by the City of Covington, Kenton County Fiscal Court, ArtsWave, the Kentucky Arts Council, the Northern Kentucky Sports Hall of Fame, and the Carol Ann and Ralph B. Hale Jr. U.S. Bank Foundation. We are also supported by members, and I'm very proud of the number of History Hour viewers who have become members or renewed their membership over the course of this year. If you haven't had a chance to renew or you're not a member yet, we would really appreciate your support. And also just let you know that the museum is open. We do have limited hours, but you can go to bcmuseum.org, and not only can you find out about how to be a member, but you can find out about all the great programming that is going on. Everything from the curators chats that Jason French puts on to in-person exhibits, and of course nature play for those little ones in your life that want to explore nature. Just a couple housekeeping items. I do see a few new viewers tonight, and I want to say welcome to you and welcome to those friends that are joining on Facebook. You might notice that your microphone is muted, but we still want you to participate in this conversation as best we can. So please use comments if you're on Facebook, or use the chat if you're joining us via Zoom. Add comments, add questions. I'll take notes during the presentation and then be able to ask your question at the end. Also, just as a reminder, depending on the device that you're using in Zoom, even when the screen is being shared and you might not be able to see everyone else, on some devices, everyone can still see everyone who has their video turned on. So just as a reminder, you might want to turn that video off in certain circumstances. So, you know, that's up to you. And let's see, though we do like seeing your smiling faces. It is my absolute pleasure to go ahead and introduce tonight's guest. We are joined by Cam Miller. And guys, he has directed, produced, edited, designed soundscapes, composed and performed countless projects in the region over the last 20 years. He's best known for his work with the Cincinnati Reds and their Hall of Fame producing exhibit films. Those include 1919 Cincinnati Reds, Crosley Field Remembered, Our True Blues, the story of the Covington Blue Sox, and others. This film that we're going to talk about tonight, and sorry, I'm still letting people into the meeting here. We keep going and going with attendees, so I'm sorry if I look a little distracted, still letting people in. But Old Latonia, America's Most Beautiful Race Course, won the Blue Chip Media Award for Best Documentary. Also, Cam has a Americana folk country album due out this year too. So he's a busy person. So glad that he took a minute to join us tonight. And Cam, I am going to turn it over to you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining. This is an absolute honor to be here to speak to you about this film. I remember when I was talking about doing this, what film would I choose? And I thought, well, with it being so close to the Kentucky Derby, what better way to get into that horse racing mindset than to talk about a track that was here uh, many, many years ago and has such a rich history. Now, of course, over the course of the hour, I'm not going to be able to give you a play-by-play, detail-by-detail description of the track. That would take 7 or 8 hours, which, by the way, was the actual running time of the first cut of this documentary. When I originally set out to do this film, it was 7 or 8 hours of detailed, excruciatingly, painfully detailed out of every race and every derby and who won and who the jockey was, who the trainer was, what the impact was locally for the economy, for the city. And it was a good film, but it was boring me to tears. And as a historian, if it's boring me to tears, I can't imagine what it would do to other people. So I decided, I got this this email from this gentleman, the Robertson family, who had someone in their family who worked at the racetrack, and they let me. They're very private, and they were very unsure about doing this, but I talked them into it. They let me see his diary for the years that he worked at Latonia and when he left, and the impact that it had on his family and in his life. And when I was reading this, it was like a novel. I mean, he kept the great notes he took, and his memory of the horse, the trainers that won, the horses that won, the jockeys, different events that happened throughout his life, working at the track and beyond. It was just, that was my film. I knew I had to scrap that 6-hour Ken Burns epic documentary and put together this short 26-minute film that kind of took you from the beginning to the end of the track in 1939, torn down 1942. So that is what this is about today. And if you've already seen the film, please bear with us. We're going to show it in its entirety, and then we will do some question and answer afterwards. So would you like me, Tara, to start the film now, or would you like me to talk?
Why don't we do the quiz?
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, so you will see this. It'll come up in the film. I want to give you this. It's kind of easy. Most of you guys might know it, but some of you might not. So the question is, what president on his speaking tour of the United States of America visited Latonia at the racetrack? And they packed it in 75, 80,000 strong, and they were hanging off the rafters just to hear this U.S. president speak during his speaking tour. So that is the question.
So what I'm going to do for everybody, and I was supposed to say this at the beginning, is I'm going to post it in the chat. We've got a couple guesses already. And how about this? How about we let everybody guess? Why don't you go ahead and start, and then we'll kind of reveal. It'll be revealed, and then we can kind of talk about the winner at the end. How does that sound?
Sounds great.
Okay, perfect.
All right, now let's see if I can figure this out. We're going to go down. We're going to get this going here on the link.
You got this. It's going to be good.
All right. Share screen. Host disabled participant screen sharing.
Oh God, no. Sorry.
That's okay.
Okay.
Try again. Here
now
we
try.
Go. Screen share. There we go. Let's go down to this link. Share that. Also make sure that the sound is working properly. Share sound. And I will make it full screen. And ladies and gentlemen, Old Latonia.
The President of the United States reaches the state of Kentucky on his cross-country speaking tour under a dazzling sun which beats upon the sprawling grandstands of Latonia Race Track Some 25,000 people now await the address of the nation's chief executive, who spoke this morning in Ohio and entered Kentucky scarcely more than 15 minutes ago, as the big 10-car presidential special train crossed the Ohio River from Cincinnati and rolled to a stop at a siding near Covington, Kentucky.
My friends of Kentucky, I am glad to come to this beautiful spot today. I know about Latonia by reading the sporting pages of the paper.
Among the thousands of citizens that packed Latonia Race Track that steamy July day was Cincinnatian and former Latonia stable boy James Robertson, who had brought his 10-year-old son to not only see the president, but to show him old Latonia, for he knew the track's days were numbered. He told him the stories of the famous jockeys and legendary racehorses that ran on those grounds. But most importantly, he said, it was the people. The people made Latonia what it was. As the president finished his speech, Robertson put his hands on his son's shoulders and said, "Boy, this was America's most beautiful race course." For as long as I can remember, I've loved horses. I was born in 1890, not too far from Latonia Springs, on a horse farm, no doubt. Now, my father taught me everything there was to know about history in the area, like Latonia Springs Hotel and their grand ballroom, and their medicinal springs where anybody who was anybody came to visit. It was run by Dr. Moser, who bought the place in the 1840s and turned it into a first-class facility. Dr. Moser named the resort after the Greek goddess of water, Latonia. If you were a member of high society in the mid-19th century, you went to Latonia Springs. When Dr. Moser passed, the place was sold and eventually closed down. But the name Latonia would be born again when Northern Kentuckians Judge Cleary and Colonel Nelson and business associates formed the Latonia Agricultural Association in 1882 and purchased 109 acres of land from the James Taylor estate between Taylor Mill Pike and the Cincinnati and Lexington Railroad tracks. Their dream was to build a first-class horse racing facility, and they did just that. By the end of May of 1883, the track was complete with a 400-foot grandstand and a beautifully manicured infield, and eventually a man-made lake. The famous John G. Carlisle visited the track and said it was the finest racing facility he had ever seen. A few days later, former President Rutherford B. Hayes toured the facilities and was equally impressed with what the owners had done. On Saturday, June 9, 1883, 8,000 fans crammed into the new Latonia Race Track to witness the first races. The very first race at Latonia was won by a horse named Markland. The feature event was won by a horse named Leonatus. The race was called the Hindu Stakes, which would later become the Latonia Derby, and it was won by the famous Isaac Murphy, who would go on to win 3 Kentucky Derbies and 5 Latonia Derbies in his Hall of Fame career. Latonia Race Track was off and running. Word spread quickly that Latonia had the best jockeys, the top horses, and was a beautiful racetrack. And betting the horses at Latonia became a favorite pastime in greater Cincinnati. With the financial success of Latonia, the owners were able to keep improving the track, including building a beautiful Victorian clubhouse. Like my father told me, old Dr. Moser never could have guessed that his name Latonia would be read in newspapers all over the country. By 1893, electric streetcars would begin service to Latonia. And boy, did it make a difference in attendance. Thousands upon thousands would come out to Latonia, and it seemed like every year a new attendance record was set. And by the turn of the century, the Latonia Derby would rival the Kentucky Derby in Louisville. In 1903, my father moved us to Cincinnati, and I saw my first race at Latonia. I don't remember who won, but I do remember the people, lots of people. After the races, my father and I stopped at a saloon on DeCourcy Pike, and that's where I heard the Latonia Rag. That day, I fell in love with Latonia, and on the way home, my father gave me a crash course in horse racing. He talked about all the jockeys and all the horses that had come to Latonia. I knew right then and there I had to get a job at Latonia Race Track. Well, in 1905, I finally got that job at Latonia, making 50 cents a day, helping people to their seat, cleaning stables, doing landscaping, whatever they needed. I got to meet all the jockeys, including Jimmy Winkfield, who once gave me $5 to carry his bags. And then there was old Mrs. Russell, the widow, who would give me a portion of her winnings for helping her out. Unfortunately, she didn't win very often. But the highlight for me that year was getting to within a few feet of Alice Roosevelt herself. I had quite a big crush on Princess Alice, as she was called. And when she came to the Latonia Derby with her future husband, Mr. Longworth, I couldn't keep my eyes off of her. I was hoping to get the chance to say hello to Miss Roosevelt, but she had a special crew that was taking care of her at the track. I didn't have the seniority yet. By the middle of the decade, the automobile had come into its own, and that just meant more people coming to the track. It also meant auto racing, which I fell in love with instantly. There was something about the sound of those engines and the dust and the dirt. I loved everything about it. So you can imagine how happy I was when Latonia got auto racing. I had followed all the automobile racers in the paper, and working at the track meant that I would get a front row seat to all the action, including the famous Barney Oldfield. I secretly wished I didn't have to work during the auto races, because I wanted to just sit back and watch the racers go. They were amazing to me. The Latonia auto races were a big hit, and the crowds were large. It was quite the success. It was so successful, in fact, that Latonia officials had plans to build an automobile raceway in Rosedale, which sat along the Licking River not too far from the racetrack. It was to be called Rosedale Speedway, and efforts were led by Latonia Mayor J.T. Earl. It was to be one of the first pure automobile racetracks in the country. The group purchased 65 acres next to Lake Walking, and in 1909, construction was well underway when the fledgling American Association, a minor league baseball outfit, told them to halt production because they may want to put a baseball field on that land. Well, it never happened, and neither did Rosedale Speedway. Besides automobile races, air shows became all the rage across the country. In the fall of 1909, the famous Curtis and Willard brought their flying machines to Latonia Race Track. Fortunately, I didn't have to work the event, but I went down there anyway because I wanted to see what these flying machines were all about. And boy, am I glad I did. Those air machines were amazing. One of the planes even did 2 loops around the Holy Cross steeple. And I got to shake hands with the famous Orville Wright, who was in town to lend his advice at the Latonia Air Show. And I finally got my chance to say hello to Alice Roosevelt. And I also got to see history, as Cincinnati pioneer newspaper woman Ruth Neely became the first woman to ever fly solo in an air machine, even though it was only a few feet off the ground. It was spectacular. Latonia had become so popular that in 1912, Hollywood came calling, and they made a movie about the Latonia Derby. I saw winning the Latonia Derby 8 times, including once with my sweetheart on our first date. Her name was Rose, and she would eventually become my wife. She must have thought I was crazy to see the movie that many times, but it was so neat to see Latonia on the big screen. By 1919, I had left my job at Latonia Race Track. It was time for me to get a real job and start a family. So I started work at the mill in Cincinnati, and that same year, Latonia was sold to the same folks that had Churchill Downs under their belt. Now in charge of Latonia was Colonel Matt J. Wynn. Colonel Wynn would now be in charge of both Churchill Downs and Latonia. And the next decade was something to behold. During the 20s, I might not have worked at Latonia, but I went down to the racetrack as often as I possibly could. My home might have been in Cincinnati, but my hometown was Latonia. All of my friends were at Latonia. John, George, Big Dave, and of course all of the L&N railroad workers that I had befriended at the track. And of course, I'd always stop in Amer's Garden for music, food, and to dance with the wife. The popularity of Latonia Race Track was at an all-time high, and the popularity of the Latonia Derby surpassed even the Kentucky Derby at Churchill Downs. And the track was as beautiful as it had ever been. The purses were bigger, the crowds were larger. There was no doubt that this was the golden age of old Latonia. In 1927, I missed my first Latonia Derby in 24 years. Rose was with child, and I had to stay home and take care of her. But when she fell asleep, I snuck over to our neighbor, Mr. Hopper's house, to listen on the radio on station WLW. It wasn't as good as being at the track, but it was pretty close.
Cincinnati Enquirer, broadcasting to you from the grandest of tracks, Latonia Racecourse in Latonia, Kentucky, on station WLW. It's a warm summer day, and it is a special day. 25,000 fans have packed the place to witness a day of racing with the finest horses in the country. The 6 horses in today's field are at the post. And there they go, they're off! Jock and Buddy Bauer are out front, with Handy Mandy snuggling in behind. Jock and Buddy Bauer are tight, neck and neck on the rail, and Jock takes the lead by half a length. But here comes Dolan, with War Eagle right behind. Jock ahead by half a length over Buddy Bauer. Handy Mandy is making her move. Look at her go. Boys, it's a horse race. Handy Mandy coming up on the outside. She's gaining. She's in the lead. Down the stretch, Handy Mandy. 2 lengths ahead. 4 lengths ahead. And Handy Mandy wins. Handy Mandy, her first win, and it's a new record. 2:28.35. That is amazing, boys. That beats Man O' War's record. 1/5 of a second faster than Man O' War, the horse of the century.
I jokingly gave Rose a hard time about missing that race for years, but it was worth it because James Jr. was born not long after that. In 1931, Latonia shined on the big screen once again, in Clark Gable's first ever starring role. The movie was called Sporting Blood and featured scenes of Latonia Race Track. When the Depression hit, it hit hard, and not even Grand Latonia could escape its wrath. Poor old Latonia became a ghost town. It was tough to get the great jockeys and great horses, and even tougher to get great crowds. Old Colonel Wynn tried night racing, starting races at 4:30 in the afternoon, so factory workers and the like could come down to the track. It worked for a little while, but it wasn't enough.
Then I'll go, or you'll know
The last race at Latonia ever was July 29th, 1939. I wasn't going to go, but something told me I should be there. James Jr. and I hopped in the car and drove down to the track. We got there just in time to see Catalonia cross the finish line, the last horse to ever win a race at Old Latonia. And on the way home, James Jr. got to see his old man cry for the first time. The last big event they'd hold at Old Latonia was the Kenton County Centennial in the summer of 1940. Fittingly enough, the event started by Eleanor Roosevelt pushing a ceremonial button at the White House. And in the spring of 1942, the Latonia Race Track was no more, bought by an oil company and torn down. They had asked me to come down to the track to be a part of the wrecking crew, but I couldn't do it. I had already said my goodbyes to Old Latonia and wanted to remember it like it was, America's most beautiful race course.
When a lad I stood one day by a cottage far away, and to me that day all nature seemed more grand. For my Sue with blushes red had just promised we should wed, and I'd come to ask her mother for her hand. As I told the old tale of a love that ne'er would fail, the gray-haired mother stroked her daughter's hair, and I fancied I could trace just a tear on her kind face as she placed my sweetheart's hand in mine and said, she was bred in old Kentucky, where the meadow grass is blue. There's the sunshine of the country in her face and manner too. She was bred in old Kentucky. Take her, boy, you're mighty lucky when you marry a girl like Sue. She was bred in old Kentucky, where the meadow grass is blue. There's the sunshine of the country in her face and manner too. She was bred in old Kentucky. Take her, boy, you're mighty lucky when you marry a girl like you.
Wow, Cam. That's so good. I just
Thank you.
absolutely love it. I've seen the sort of preview part before, but wow, it was just amazing. So there's a bunch of questions. So if you're okay with it, I'm just gonna kind of like head in, and I've tried to kind of group them by sort of general topics. So I've got some questions about Latonia and the racetrack. Let's start with those. But then I've got some questions about how you found that all those photos and some of the other the audio and stuff too.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So and they're not just my questions, by the way. There's questions from the audience too. So I'm not trying to steal all the time. Though this is really, really cool. And yeah, I meant to say this is perfect timing, right? For Derby weekend coming up.
Right. Right.
So let's start with the basics. Can you talk about exactly where, what's the situation now where the racetrack was, right? So obviously Latonia, but let's get a little more detailed about where, if somebody wanted to go to the site. And I know, but why don't you explain it?
Right. If you go to the Latonia Shopping Center, where the Burlington Coat Factory, before that, Value City, was for some of our older residents like myself in the 70s and 80s that grew up going to Value City. And their mother would shop and you'd just be sitting around like, can we please leave this place? But it was so, I mean, when you're a kid, you don't understand the land that you're on, the historical significance of it. I mean, here I am walking around Value City, and feet away, a president, was
Yeah.
there. And all of the jockeys and all of the, all of the people that made that track so special. And there was even a photo, if I'm not mistaken, in Value City, that showed where the track was. And I remember as a child being curious about that. I, of course, would find out later what was there. But if you go, the last shot in my film, I superimposed the track today, 2016, when I filmed it, as to where the horses would come in that final stretch. And you can kind of see, if you look at the hill, I matched up the hill. You can stand in the parking lot at the Burlington Coat Factory lot, and you can look right out there and see exactly where that track was. And there's a few things around that are still kind of there from that time, a few barns and whatnot. But yeah, it's right there in Latonia. You can go there right now and just sit there. I've done it myself. I've got a cup of coffee. I've sat there and just kind of soaked it in, especially when I was working on the film. It kind of gave me those documentary vibes. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Random personal note, Shane's grandmother's family, they had a bar that was, we kept hearing it's across the street. And so, we've kind of figured out, we think where it was, which is sort of like by the car lot over there now. But yeah, fun stories passed down, about that establishment for sure.
Right. I'll bet.
Yeah, for sure. So let's see. I have a question, and this is sort of based on sort of personal experience. So there was a race. I'm originally from northeastern Kentucky, and the people that have been on this like every time have heard me say, a few times, I'm not originally from northern Kentucky. So I feel like, I'm learning every single time we do this. But back where I'm from, there was actually a town, and then a racetrack was built there, and they actually changed the name of the town. So now it's Raceland, Kentucky. But it didn't used to be Raceland. They changed it because they were so happy, right? And then so many people came to the racetrack. So which came first, the name Latonia as a city or the racetrack?
It's kind of the chicken and the egg kind of thing, because the Latonia Springs, dating back to the 1840s, and the Latonia Springs Hotel was there. So the town kind of sort of was there. I mean, you'll get different historians to say, the racetrack built the town built the racetrack. But I always kind of tend to lean towards, with the hotel being there and then Rosedale and Milldale being in that neighborhood, it's kind of like the situation where the name was there. The people that bought the land, Latonia Agricultural Association, they named it after the hotel. So was it a town? Yes, kind of, sort of. It was a town because people would go there and visit the spa and whatnot. And when did the post office come? I mean, that type of thing. You can get into the arguments of whether there was a town or not. But so it's kind of a tricky question, but there's no question that Latonia was made because of that track. The town grew out, the bars, like you mentioned before, and the different establishments and the housing that developed around there. And it was just its own little unique town before it was annexed in Covington.
Yeah. Do you know when that was, by chance, the annex from Covington?
Somebody's going to yell at me. I want to say it was 09. I could be wrong about that. So please,
Okay.
somebody correct me if I'm wrong about that.
Sure. Sure. No, we can have some. I'm sure somebody
Nobody
on
knows.
this chat,
Yeah,
right, has the
right,
date memorized
right.
of when that happened. Well, cool. Okay, so there's a couple other questions in the chat, and I just want to make sure that one of the questions actually was, where was the Latonia Springs Hotel? So you've kind of, sort of answered that as far as it was, nearby,
Well, it
but
was if you actually can go there now, the UDF right there
oh,
on 3L. That's where
yeah.
the hotel's at. So there's never been a
Got it.
photograph that's popped up. We do have a few sketches, and I did my own for the film. Those are my sketches that based upon what I knew about it from research, what it looked like and how. But from all accounts, it was just this amazing place. I mean, you're talking about people would come from Louisville, Lexington, Nashville, of course, Cincinnati, Toledo, Detroit. They would come to this spa for the springs, and the
Yeah.
hotel was just a grand place.
Very cool. Very, very interesting. By the way, Cam, at some point you're gonna need to read the chat. lots of positive feedback
Awesome.
in the chat. So I'm not
That's
gonna read
great.
every comment, but you should definitely check that out. I can actually
Absolutely.
export it and send it to you. So
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you.
yeah. So let's go a little bit to some of the video and audio that you were able to capture. Really, really cool stuff. And even the music. And so let's start actually with a question. We've got somebody on Facebook who was really interested in, the music that you had. And I know at the credits at the end, you did have, what those songs were, but it was kind of quick and we were all kind of trying to, take everything in. So
Right.
can you tell us a little bit about the music, where it came from? And specifically, Bob would like to know the song "She Was Bred in Old Kentucky." Who performed that?
I off the top of my head, I don't remember the name of the artist, but I found it by going back and doing period pieces by looking at what was being played in these establishments on player pianos in the 1920s. And I found sheet music and I realized, okay, well, it had to be this time, had to be this. So I kind of tried to make it make sense, but it's one of my favorite songs and I had to include it because of the mention of Kentucky. I know it's an Irish group, obviously, but as far as the rest of the music, besides what I got from some of the archives and the player piano pieces, I composed the rest of the music. So all the piano pieces you hear is me, and themes that would come in my head, and especially kind of reworking my old Kentucky home piece to kind of give it that when the notes would hit on certain spots, and I remember playing it as my visuals were popping up on the screen. It just felt right to have that in there. And I composed a theme for it as well that I should have probably put on Spotify and people could have downloaded if I would have thought about it. It wasn't a thing in 2016. I didn't think about that thing, but perhaps I will eventually. But yeah, it was so fun to put this music together. All my films, music is so important. It's 50% of the film experience. And I go back to Star Wars and George Lucas, who always said 50% of my film is because of John Williams, the composer. He makes that film. And I kind of am of that same fabric. I like to place music in certain spots and kind of give it that, that flavor that it needs. And being able to produce and compose music myself makes it great because I don't have to hire anybody.
That is good. That's a bonus. So, okay. So let's dive into this question just a little bit deeper. So you're talking about player piano sheet music.
Right.
Where does one find that? Like how does that even happen?
So many places. Thankfully, the internet is a thing and it can be good and bad, but in this case, boy, it was good. I found so many piano rolls and I was able to take some of these rolls where I would just go on eBay or places and I would research, or a friend knew a guy who knew a guy, and I was able to go and put them in these piano player rolls and get them out and extract them and then record them. And other pieces, I had old 78s and old records that people sent from the period. So it was a combination of a lot of things, but being able to hear some of those, recording some of the actual rolls with a microphone up the speaker was just so much fun. It was such a blast to do. And like I said, music is so important, but that in particular was such a fun thing to do. Yeah,
that is really interesting. And I think, I mean, you're right. It just makes the entire experience so much richer. I just had a thought that, there's a lot of people with really specific, questions sort of with, that I'm getting to, but, we played this on YouTube, right? So anybody can go back and watch it at any time. So, I can't do it right now because I'm sort of managing all this at the same time, but I'll try to go back in and actually post the link to the documentary onto this event on Facebook so that everybody can get the whole thing if they want to go back and look at something in particular.
Absolutely. Great. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Yeah, because somebody else asked like, hey, I want a name, and I'm thinking, you know what, it might just be easier just to watch the whole thing again if somebody has a specific question like that.
Right.
So okay, cool. So let's talk about some of the rest of the research. I mean, you mentioned the journal. That's a find, right? I mean, that's incredible.
Right.
You know, what kind of condition was this in? I mean,
it had to be scanned and sent to me because it was in such poor condition. And this family, from what I gather, he lived in Mississippi towards the end of his life, this James Robertson, and his family. I mean, there's only a few left that I'm aware of. And again, they were very private. And I had stumbled upon it because I was doing my Blue Sox my documentary on the Covington Blue Sox. And this name popped up on a forum, and then it led to one person saying, I think there's somebody that I know that you might be interested in. And then, you go down that rabbit hole.
yeah.
And it turns out, hey, I'm going to send you these. Tell me if you could use them for your film. I'm just thinking it's going to be, okay, that'll be good background information if I want to know like who worked at the stables. Maybe he has some idea of who worked here and what was some of the occupations that they would do at the track. Did you work in the landscaping? But when I started to get these scans and these emails coming through, and I started reading them and putting them in order, there was my film. It became let's make this historical perfect documentary, the 10th piece series that'll be on PBS, or do I make this thing with this story based upon this guy's recollection? So everything you hear in there is me narrating based upon his words. I might have tweaked a few things here and there because it was not, legible, or there was some things that wouldn't make sense. I had to kind of fit it together, but for the most part, 95% is exactly verbatim how he said it. And I found out that he had a little bit of a Southern accent. So I practiced doing that for a few times just to make sure I had that Kentucky Southern twang down a little bit, which was fun. I was doing it and people were like, what are you doing? I'd be in the library. And then he went down to the racetrack and it was like, is he okay over here? Somebody want to check on him? But it was such a great find. And to be able to have those scans, it completely changed the way I wanted to do the film. And I think it made it what it was. It just gave it that life, that humanity that you don't always get to hear. It's just these records. This happened and the Derby happened and then it closed down and there's this kind of open bookend, this and then this. But this gave it flavor and gave it life. And I'm just so glad that I found this. It gave it justice. And like I said, it made the film. I'm just so happy with the way it turned out.
Oh, it was phenomenal. And the other thing that I felt like it did, is you've got this person, this real actual person story, but he's like living history that we do read about, right? Like with Alice Roosevelt and, tying all of these sort of national and world events sort of all together into where Latonia kind of fit, right? So that was really cool, really, really cool too. So we've got a couple of other questions coming into the chat and let's see. Oh my goodness, where did it go? One, and this is a little bit of like back to the historical context for a second. Did you happen to read or research anything about how was Churchill Downs able to survive the Depression? I mean, did they have to pick one or the other, and so they picked Churchill, or what happened?
Right, that's exactly what it was. I mean, Churchill was. I mean, and of course, there was a track built in Chicago. So you had the 20s, right? That was Latonia's heyday. It was the Roaring 20s in America, and it was the Roaring 20s Latonia. But then when that ended, all the money that was made in the 20s, you started to get these other tracks spread across the country and bigger purses. And those guys aren't going to go to little old Latonia when they can make a boatload of money in Chicago and Louisville. So the ownership kind of gets complicated and you're in the weeds a little bit. But once the Depression hit and the writing was on the wall, I mean, there was nothing they could do. They tried many different things, but yeah, the ownership was like, which one are we going to get rid of? Churchill Downs, or are we going to get rid of Latonia? And the obvious choice. I mean, is it fair? Absolutely not. But business, money, that's how it goes. I mean, you can't really make that decision and say, well, Latonia is this nice little historical piece, but Churchill Downs, I mean, that's some history too. How do you do it? They went back and forth, and obviously the right choice was made in the long haul. And think about the racetrack, the auto racetrack that was going to be built. I mean, you would have had, which I did a film on that as well. It's also on my YouTube page. So if you go there, you can see it. But the Rosedale Speedway would have beat by a few months Indianapolis. And that was their plan, was to get the most. They're already signing contracts with these racers to come here. So that track gets built, Indianapolis 500 would have been the Rosedale 500. I mean, it all adds up. And then they pull out, and Indianapolis a few months later opens up, and that becomes the first oval semi or pure concrete track. And that's what the Rosedale was. So it all ties together. It's a neat history. It's so deep, and so there's so much to it. So hopefully one day I'll be able to put that documentary, maybe shorten it a little bit, and kind of give you more of what, to make it easier for people to watch.
Yeah. Well, but that's what makes history cool, right? Not just like all the dates and so forth. Like it's tying all that pieces together. Absolutely. So one of our viewers has an excellent question that I was hoping to have time to ask. So we'll go into this, which is, what are your future project plans?
See, the thing is that I am working on 7 or 8 films at a time. But here's the thing. I do work for the Reds, and I do work for school districts, and I have clients, but I'm always like getting those done and racing back into my home office to work on these passion projects. I have Ezard Charles is a film that I'm doing on the boxer from Cincinnati. Yeah. The one that's coming up next is going to be in Dayton, Kentucky, where I'm actually a resident now, of the Tannehill brothers. It's going to be in June or July. We're going to have an outdoor premiere, and I'll be announcing that when we get closer. It's going to be on the Tannehill brothers of Dayton, Kentucky, 2 brothers that played in the major leagues from Dayton. And the oldest one, Jesse, pitched a no-hitter against his brother, who played for the White Sox. And it kind of tells that tale within that game. It's such a neat, cool history. I cannot wait. This documentary is so fun. It was so fun to do. So I've got that. I've got Cincinnati Royals. I've got the Cincinnati Stingers. I've got some other ones that are going to be more tied into some Cincinnati things that happen on the other side of the river, as far as not as sports-wise. So there's so much going on that I can't even keep track. I have to kind of keep a post-it. Okay, I'm working on this today. I'm working on that day. Plus, I've got a album coming out called Old Latonia, which I hope to premiere Latonia. It's kind of like this folk alt rock country type of thing. It's taken from the lives of all of these people in the 20s. I found this newspaper clipping where this guy profiled 9 or 10 residents, and he had their story, their background, and their names, and it became an album because each one has a story to tell. So the album is that. It's these 9 people and their stories of living in Latonia in the 20s and kind of what their life was like. And it was just this profile piece from the Kentucky Post that I found. I was like, that's an album. So I recorded the music and sang it and wrote the lyrics to it, obviously. But that's coming up soon whenever I have some time.
Yeah, and what in your free time, which sounds like it's not very much. Well, okay, so we want to know more about that. So please keep us informed about that, because that sounds super cool.
Thank you.
Both personally, and I'm sure the museum would like to, we're trying to highlight local artists and so forth too. So, definitely keep us tuned in on what the timing looks like for that. Let's see. Oh my gosh, you know what we didn't do? We forgot to talk about the quiz.
Yes.
And I think if everybody was paying attention, they already know the answer to the quiz. So, but why don't you talk a little bit about that day? What was the deal with our late President Roosevelt coming to Latonia? What was up with that?
Right, he's on the speaking tour, and it was a last minute thing. He ends up going to, and you can read the entire transcript and listen to it. I mean, the audio I got is just phenomenal. I couldn't believe I found it. To have that entire speech, I just played a snippet of it when he mentions Latonia. But he's there to stump for different politicians for the party. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it was his idea to go to Latonia because he had heard about it from reading the papers, which is just cool. You're thinking he's in the White House, pulls the sporting section open, and he sees Latonia. He's like, that's the place I need to go, because he was a big horse racing fan. So you get just to be there. I cannot imagine. And this guy was there with his son in the final days. Well, boy, I used to work here, and there's the president, in the infield with these people here. Just what a remarkable time. But yeah, it's so great because there's photos. I mean, there's footage and there's photos of this. And it's like because the most documentaries I do, there's nothing. I'm having to do it myself. I have to draw all and sketch out ideas, what people said. So this was one of those occasions where there was so many clippings and so many photos, and the president speaking, they documented it very, very well. So thankfully, and just a great neat little thing about, if you go over that spot right now, that's where FDR stood. I mean, that's just so
cool.
Yeah.
So where did the audio come from? Like, who saved
that? I actually went to the FDR library. I Googled FDR library, and it gives all of these speeches, not only the written, but also MP3s.
Really?
like, this is great. So I downloaded it and I was able to use it in my film. No copyright on. It's all free to the public, of course, presidential records. And yeah, just fantastic. So I encourage anybody just to Google that for the speech of Latonia. You can get the whole thing.
That is so cool. That's what I always want to know, right? Like, like, what do you do? Anyway, I think it's fascinating. So I just want to let everybody know. Okay, so I'm going to give this one to two people because, I mean, their answers are at the exact same time. And, technically they were like, separate little bubbles on the chat. But so I'm going to call it for Paul Weisenberger, who joins us quite often. So congrats to Paul. Hey, Paul, if you would send me a direct message in the chat with your address, that would help me out so I don't have to go back into Zoom and find it. And then also Virginia Johnson, congrats. Not only do you guys win bragging rights, by the way, but you also win, and I'm sometimes I get behind in my correspondence, but eventually you are going to get this really sweet little button that says BCM Northern Kentucky History Hour on there.
Well,
so
see, now I wish I would have answered the question because I want a cool
Right?
pen. So
Well,
what was I thinking?
did you put your address in the
I did.
registration? Okay,
I
perfect.
absolutely did.
Wonderful. Well, maybe you'll get one too if you're lucky. So awesome. Well, hey, we can't wait to see more of your projects. We are so happy that you joined us. Thank you so much. It was cool to have this different format. I think it worked out great. So great to meet you. Thanks to everybody else who joined us in this super fun evening. Like I said, take a sec right now, Cam, to look at the chat, and I'm going to tell everybody about what we're going to do next week. So next week we have local historian Anthony Froelich. He is an attorney and former judge. Judge Froelich is going to talk about his book, Thomas Zane Roberts, Timekeeper. So it's all about this guy, Thomas Zane Roberts, and just kind of all of his activities in Boone County. So I think it's going to be super cool. Judge Froelich is an awesome presenter, and I think we're all going to have a great time together. So it's 7:30 already. It goes so fast. But thank you, everybody. On behalf of Behringer-Crawford Museum, I'm just going to ask you one more time to go to the website and check it out, or you can watch our curators chats or any of the past History Hour episodes. They're on our Facebook page. They're on YouTube. And again, you can go to bcmuseum.org and find out more. So lots of people who are from Latonia who absolutely love this cam. So hey, appreciate it so much. You guys all have a great night. Thank you
very much. Appreciate it.
See ya.